Keir Starmer just refused to rule out Britain rejoining the EU. Not once, not twice, but 5 times in a single interview. 5 separate opportunities to say, no, we're not rejoining, and 5 times he dodged the question like a politician who's discovered that words have consequences. This is the same man who, during the election campaign, explicitly ruled out rejoining in his lifetime. But now he's a number 10, suddenly that commitment has become rather flexible. In an interview with The Observer, he was asked 5 times whether he'd rule out Britain rejoining the EU in his lifetime. 5 times. That's not a journalist being aggressive or trying to trap him. That's a journalist giving him multiple opportunities to repeat a position he'd previously stated clearly. And 5 times, Starmer refused to give a straight answer. His actual response was, "We've stopped having the discussion about whether we should go backwards and pick over Brexit." Which is a fascinating non-answer because it sounds like he's saying, let's move on from Brexit debates while simultaneously refusing to rule out the biggest possible Brexit reversal. It's like someone asking, are you planning to burn down your house? And you responding with, I've stopped discussing fire safety. Technically, you've said words, but you absolutely haven't answered the question. Now, one refusal to answer might be an accident, a misheard question, a distraction, whatever. 2 refusals starts to look deliberate. 5 refusals is a strategy. Starmer was given 5 chances to simply repeat what he'd said during the election campaign, and he chose not to. That's not a communications error, that's a policy shift being signaled through deliberate ambiguity. He wants to keep the door open to rejoining without actually saying he wants to rejoin, because saying it would be politically explosive. And this doesn't exist in isolation. This comes right after Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy refused 7 times to rule out reversing Brexit in his own interview. 7 times! That's even more refusals than Starmer managed, which is quite the achievement. Lammy, who is apparently in some kind of competition to see how many times you can dodge a question in a single interview, told the Newsagents podcast that it's self-evident that leaving the EU badly damaged our economy and suggested rejoining the customs union would boost growth. Lammy's comments were remarkable for their bluntness. He wasn't being subtle or diplomatic. He straight up said Brexit badly damaged the economy and created serious friction. He said untruths were peddled by people who thought leaving would be good. That's not carefully calibrated political messaging, that's a full-throated condemnation of Brexit from the Deputy Prime Minister. And then he had the audacity to say, that's not currently our policy, while simultaneously arguing for it. It's the political equivalent of saying, I'm not saying we should rob a bank, but here's why robbing this particular bank would be really beneficial. The not currently our policy formulation is particularly weaselly. Not currently. That implies it might become policy in the future. It's leaving the door open while claiming you're not. Politicians use this language when they want to prepare the ground for a policy change without committing to it yet. It's testing the waters, seeing how people react, building the argument so that when they do announce the policy shift, they can say, well, we've been discussing this for months. What's absolutely brilliant about this whole situation is that by refusing to rule things out, both Starmer and Lammy have created exactly the discussion they claim they don't want to have. If Starmer had just repeated, we're not rejoining the EU in my lifetime, the story would have been, Starmer reaffirms Brexit position, nothing to see here. But by refusing to say it 5 times, he's created a massive story about whether Labour is planning to reverse Brexit. It's a masterclass in how not to handle media relations. The excuse that we've stopped having the discussion about whether we should go backwards and pick over Brexit is particularly rich coming from a prime minister whose deputy prime minister literally just spent an entire interview discussing exactly that. You can't claim you've moved on from Brexit debates while your second-in-command is out there arguing we should rejoin the customs union. It's like saying, I've stopped arguing with my partner while actively having a blazing row in the background. But then we got Cabinet Minister Pat McFadden on Sunday trying to shut down all the speculation, and honestly, it was like watching someone try to put out a fire with a water pistol. McFadden told Sky News that rejoining the customs union would be difficult because the UK has just conducted 3 trade deals this year. Which is a fair point, actually. If you're in a customs union, you can't do independent trade deals because you have to follow the union's external tariff regime. That's kind of the whole point of a customs union. When asked if Lammy was wrong, McFadden said the Prime Minister has made it pretty clear that the UK won't rejoin the grand architecture of the EU, meaning the single market and customs union. Except the Prime Minister has literally just refused 5 times to rule out rejoining, so it's not clear at all. It's the opposite of clear. It's deliberately ambiguous. McFadden is trying to clean up a mess by pretending the mess doesn't exist, which is a bold strategy that absolutely isn't working. What we're watching here is a government that's completely divided on Brexit, or at least pretending to be divided, so they can float trial balloons without taking responsibility for them. You've got Lammy arguing openly for closer EU integration, including customs union membership. You've got Starmer refusing to rule out rejoining, and you've got McFadden insisting that's not the policy. These positions are contradictory, and the contradiction is deliberate. It gives them flexibility to move in whatever direction seems politically advantageous without being pinned down to a specific position they might have to defend. The political calculation here seems to be that enough time has passed since Brexit that they can start edging back towards the EU without massive backlash. They're betting that Leave voters have either forgotten their promises or care more about other issues now. They're betting that Remain voters will be thrilled at any movement towards rejoining. And they're betting that the general public is too distracted by cost of living issues and NHS waiting times to really focus on Brexit reversals. But here's the problem with that calculation. Brexit wasn't just about economics or trade policy. It was about sovereignty, democracy, and trust in the political system. People voted Leave for all sorts of reasons, but a common thread was feeling like politicians didn't listen to them and institutions didn't represent them. And now, after voting to Leave, after politicians promised to respect that vote, after an election where Labour specifically said they wouldn't try to reverse it, here we are, with senior Labour figures openly discussing rejoining. This is exactly the kind of political behavior that created the sentiment that led to Brexit in the first place. People voted for something, politicians promised to implement it, and then those same politicians immediately started looking for ways to reverse it because they didn't like the result. It's democracy with an asterisk that says unless the elites disagree. And voters notice this stuff. They might not follow every Westminster drama or every policy detail, but they absolutely notice when politicians break major promises about major issues. The manifesto angle makes this even worse. Labour's 2024 manifesto explicitly ruled out rejoining the EU, the single market, and the customs union. They knew this would be checked. They knew people would hold them to it. They made the commitment anyway to win votes. And now, 6 months later, they're already walking it back through deliberate ambiguity and senior ministers floating alternatives. At what point does a manifesto become completely worthless? If you can break major commitments within months of an election, why should anyone believe anything in a manifesto ever again? What's particularly frustrating about this approach is the dishonesty of the approach. If Labour genuinely believes Britain should rejoin the EU or the customs union, they should make that argument openly, present the case, debate the merits, let people decide. But they won't do that because they know it's politically toxic. So instead, they're trying to edge towards it through incremental steps and deliberate ambiguity, hoping nobody notices until it's too late to object. It's governance through deception, and it's corrosive to democratic trust. The economic arguments both Lammy and implicitly Starmer are making also don't hold up to scrutiny, as we've covered in previous videos. The claim that Brexit badly damaged our economy is contradicted by growth comparisons with France and Germany. We've grown at similar or better rates than comparable EU economies. The apocalyptic predictions haven't materialized. That doesn't mean Brexit has been perfect or costless, but the evidence doesn't support claims of catastrophic damage. And the Turkey example Lammy used for successful customs union membership is genuinely bizarre. Turkey's economic performance hasn't been great. Their customs union with the EU is widely considered problematic because they have to accept EU trade rules without any say in making them. It's literally one of the worst possible arrangements. Using Turkey as your model for what Britain should do is like using the Titanic as your model for successful ocean voyages. Technically, it had some good features, but the overall outcome wasn't ideal. The trade deals McFadden mentioned are actually significant because they represent something Britain couldn't do as an EU member. We've negotiated independent agreements with Australia, New Zealand, and several other countries. These might not be huge economically, but they demonstrate the principle of trade policy independence. If we rejoin the customs union, we'd have to tear up those deals. That's not impossible, but it's a real cost that needs to be acknowledged rather than brushed aside. What's the endgame here? Is Labour genuinely planning to try to rejoin the EU, or are they just keeping options open while focusing on closer cooperation short of membership? The ambiguity makes it impossible to know, which is probably the point. They want to maintain flexibility to move in whatever direction seems politically advantageous without being pinned down to a specific position they might have to defend. But this strategy has costs. Every time Starmer refuses to rule something out, every time Lammy argues for customs union membership, every time a minister has to go on TV to contradict the deputy prime minister, it reinforces the impression of a government that doesn't know what it wants or is not being honest about what it wants. Neither interpretation inspires confidence. The 5 refusals are particularly damaging because they're so easy to communicate and so obviously evasive. You can show voters the clip of him being asked 5 times and refusing to answer, and they'll immediately understand he's hiding something. It's the kind of political own goal that becomes shorthand for untrustworthiness. And in politics, once you've established a reputation for not giving straight answers, it's incredibly difficult to recover. We're going to be tracking every development in this story because it's clearly not going away. Make sure you're subscribed because we're posting multiple times daily, and this Brexit debate is about to explode in ways the government clearly didn't anticipate. Hit that like button if you think Starmer should have just answered the question, and let me know in the comments whether you think Labour is genuinely planning to reverse Brexit or just catastrophically bad at media management. This is UK Political Insight, and honestly, this government keeps handing us content on a silver platter. I'll see you in the next one very soon.